Hello everybody, coming back at you all with another top 10 Commander video. Just want to remind you all, if you are interested in supporting the channel, my TCG Player affiliate link is in the description below, so whatever purchases you make on that website will go towards helping out the channel. Thank you so much for all of your support. So, I want to go over what was a really cool strategy but didn't necessarily work out all that well. A couple years ago, a lot of the cycling cards from Amonkhet helped to form what was a very raw deck, usually around Zur the Enchanter. A deck where you could quickly and efficiently cycle and discard cards in order to trigger certain abilities. Now, this didn't always work out and it wasn't a super powerful strategy, but there were some interesting interactions with cards like Astral Slide. And if you had Fluctuator, you could make most cycling costs pretty much zero. This would make it really easy to trigger certain cards, not necessarily just cycling, as I mentioned, also discard triggers, just a fun little deck. Now, as far as the criteria goes, the card itself has to cycle. Also pretty cool because there are some new cycling cards from Ikoria and Commander 2020. Honorable mentions, we of course have a ton of lands with the cycling ability. We can't really go without mentioning how important it is to have consistency in these decks. You need something to cycle. The fact that you can have cycling on some of your lands means that you're not going to rely on just your non-land cards for your strategy. We have a cool card here that I was going to put on the list, but on its own it isn't super powerful. Drannith Stinger. One of those cards you could of course take advantage of cycling with, in combination with other cards that will also deal damage whenever you discard or cycle. Drannith Stinger will end up dealing a ton of damage. And there's the cool card Unpredictable Cyclone. I think it's an awesome card, not necessarily one I'm looking for in cycling though. The whole point of cycling to me is to just end up with a card in my hand so I can eventually just keep cycling. That's usually how I played the decks. Awesome that you can get a card almost like a Possibility Storm. And we can't go without mentioning some of the Decree cards, although one is on the list. I will put Decree of Annihilation as an honorable mention because it's just a devastating card. In the right situation, you can just shut down your opponent's decks. So number 10 here, we have Shark Typhoon. I really love cards that reward you for playing non-creature spells. It really just adds teeth to a spellcaster strategy, or really just any deck where you're playing mostly non-creature spells. It helps you go toe-to-toe with, let's say, more aggressive decks, because you're going to get these shark tokens every time you cast one of those spells. Not to mention the cycling ability isn't just a simple discard it to draw a card. You can also get a pretty big shark token if you have plenty of mana. Number 9 is Reconnaissance Mission. This is basically Coastal Piracy, Bident of Thassa, but with a cycling ability. This is something you're going to notice on this list. A card is just really good and it happens to have cycling. If there's a downside to cycling itself, is that the cards aren't necessarily better because they have the cycling ability. It's just something that they all synergize together for. I mean, Coastal Piracy is a great card. This is essentially Coastal Piracy with a cycling ability, so it is pretty much better for that reason. Number 8 is Sylvan Reclamation. Technically, basic land cycling is still cycling. It is not the simple discard for a card, so it's not always the best in certain situations. Sometimes you want to cycle to get to more cycling cards, but again, it's another case of the card is just really good and it happens to have a cycling ability. You get to exile up to 2 artifacts and or enchantments, which is basically a Return to Dust. However, Return to Dust does have some casting restrictions, only really allowing you to hit 2 cards if it's your main phase. This is 1 more mana and it's in 2 colors, so it's a bit more expensive, but it's definitely a better card if you're able to cast it. Just awesome removal. Number 7 is Tectonic Reformation. Now this is an all-around really good card. If you're playing a land strategy in red, it's useful. If you're playing just a mono red deck, you might want this kind of card draw. Having a hand filled with lands is always a bad thing, so if you have nothing better to do, you might as well discard it and then draw another card. This card is just awesome, though. It could fit into so many strategies. I think it stands apart because it enables you to cycle other cards, whereas most of these are just one and dones. Those cards don't really offer you many more cycling opportunities. This does. Number 6 is Ancient Excavation. This may be one of the most underrated cards, I think, in blue-black. It is situational, so it may not be that big of a deal if you only have a couple cards in your hand. But let's say if you have at least 4, it's going to give you some value. Not to mention the discarding synergies that I mentioned before. You'll notice that a lot of cards that synergize with cycling will also synergize with whenever you discard a card. So this card here, Instant Speed, I think is just great value for only 4 mana, and I think, you know, the basic land cycling, it's not a big deal, but it's a reason why it's on the list. It can technically cycle, but in addition to that, you are still discarding, which is what you want to do in those strategies. And then number 5, speaking of discarding, we have Archfiend of Ifnir. If you love cycling, this is the card for you. You will be rewarded heavily for cycling and discarding. -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures pretty much means that if they have indestructibles or whatever, you're probably going to be able to get rid of it. You could have an insane setup where you play this and then Ancient Excavation, and let's say it's 4 cards again. That's 4 -1/-1 counters. -1/-1 counters don't go away at the end of turn. So it is a very powerful ability. Again, another instance where it has a cycling ability, but it's also really good in combination with a cycling strategy. Also going to be seeing play in pretty much most discard decks in black. Just way too good in black when most of the removal is just destroy. So sacrifice, -1/-1 counters, you could pretty much deal with any creature that's coming your way. And number 4 is Akroma's Vengeance. You can destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Also has a cycling ability, which, again, another instance of a card just being really good. It happens to have a cycling ability, probably one of the better cycling cards. A big downside to the cycling strategy is that you kind of have to go all or nothing with it in order to really get the best value. So you need cards that are going to serve a utility purpose. Utility usually being what's outside of your presented strategy. So if you need something to serve the purpose of removal, you have cards like Akroma's Vengeance. And there are pretty good removal cards that also have cycling. The same thing could be said for some counter spells, although I don't think there are that many good counter spells with cycling. You just need to have answers, you need to have removal, and Akroma's Vengeance has always been a pretty decent card for that reason. Number 3, we have Dismantling Wave. Now this card is insane because not only does it have the cycling ability, but it does something when you cycle beyond just allowing you to draw a card. So for each opponent, you destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment that player controls. Already a pretty decent sorcery for 3 mana, but when you cycle it for 8 mana, you destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Really awesome new commander from Commander 2020 that will allow you to pretty much cycle for free. So if you have a card that gives you value for the cycling ability, but the cycling cost is pretty expensive, make sure this is one of the ones that you cast for free. It's what you need in a cycling deck is more consistency, you need answers. It's just a very good addition to that strategy. Number 2 is Decree of Pain, whopping 8 mana black sorcery, but as far as the Decree cards go, this one is easily the best. You destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. You draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. It has a cycling of 5 mana, but when you cycle it, all creatures get -2 until end of turn. So I do rank this higher than Akroma's Vengeance and Dismantling Wave, even though you're only able to deal with creatures. It's higher because overall it's a game-winning spell. You can set yourself up for pretty much the rest of the game. Destroy 20 creatures, you're drawing 20 cards. Your hand should be beyond full at that point, and you should have ways of winning the game pretty easily. It is twice the mana for pretty much a damnation, but the insane amount of card draw is well worth it. Which brings us to number 1. Now this card I think is incredibly dominant if you can get it going. Not only is it just good for cycling, but you just get some extra value from whenever you have to cycle. It's pretty much Astral Slide with a cycling ability. So whenever you cycle it or cycle another card while Astral Drift is on the battlefield, you may exile target creature. If you do, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. You could of course use this to take advantage of some ETBs that you have, but it is way more useful using it as a form of protection. Exiling whatever nasty creatures want to attack you, you will protect yourself, which is very much needed in a strategy where you're not going to be throwing up the most intimidating creatures. It is probably one of the coolest things that the cycling deck can do, and it's been able to do it before with Astral Slide. You pretty much can have 2 of them in one deck now, and outside of maybe Blank, this deck is going to do it pretty efficiently, stopping your opponents from attacking you, maybe interrupting combos because the creature doesn't come back until the next end step. Very interesting card, and I think those are the ones that stand out the most. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about cycling cards in Commander. These are just my top 10. Really big fan of the strategy. Anyway, you all take it easy. Void here signing off. Have a wonderful day.